This week, several of Trump's most high-profile nominees appeared on Capitol Hill, looking to clear their first hurdles on the path to confirmation. Secretary of Defense hopeful Pete Hegseth was able to make it through mostly unscathed, and he added the support of Senator Joni Ernst, a crucial vote for the former Fox News anchor turned possible leader of the Pentagon. Today, Kristi Noem is in the hot seat as she looks to take over the Department of Homeland Security. That's a top role that would help enact Trump's agenda on border security and mass deportation. Joining me now with the latest from Noem's hearing and more is the Hill's congressional reporter, Mychael Schnell. Hey, Mychael.
Hey, Niall, good to be with you.
Absolutely. So let's dive right into Kristi Noem's confirmation hearing. She was pressed over who will lead the charge on Trump's mass deportation effort. Did she appear to give any insight into what her plans were to help secure the border?
Well, Niall, there was one interesting part of the hearing that's starting to generate a little bit of buzz. It was during a question about some of those policies and that legislation and that action that may be taken in pertaining to the border and the situation at the southern border. Kristi Noem said that President-elect Donald Trump will be in charge of the border, which is interesting because she is, of course, going to be the DHS chief. We've heard from some other nominees that they would not blindly carry out some of the president's goals and requests. We, of course, have heard a lot of lofty things come from the president-elect in terms of his goals and things he wants to achieve. So hearing Kristi Noem say that the president will be in charge of the border was an interesting moment. Of course, we have heard Trump vow mass deportations and things like that. Curious to see what executive orders we could see come as soon as Monday afternoon after he's sworn in. But definitely an interesting hearing with Kristi Noem today.
And obviously there were a lot of nominees, as we said, appearing on Capitol Hill this week. And maybe the most contentious was Pete Hegseth. Now, he does have the support of Senator Ernst, as we mentioned. There was, I think, a widespread perception, Mychael, that Democrats failed to land certainly any real knockout punches on Hegseth. Is the broad expectation now that we expect him to clear the Senate?
It seems that way, right? Joni Ernst was one of the final holdouts and seen as such a key vote because she's such a key person on the issue. She's a combat veteran herself. She's a survivor of sexual assault. She has been one of the largest stalwarts against sexual assault in the military up on Capitol Hill. So a lot of folks were looking at her to see how she would vote on Hegseth's nomination. And she, of course, came out and said that she will support him. Now, there are still a few holdouts at this current moment. Mitch McConnell, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski. But those holdouts would pretty much all have to vote against Pete Hegseth for him to not get the confirmation, which right now is seen as a bit of a long shot, again, because he has just wrapped up broad support from the Republican conference, including Joni Ernst. So I would say that it's not completely wrapped up yet because there are still some of those holdouts, but it's looking pretty good for him.
So on the other hand, we have Marco Rubio, who's Trump's nominee to be Secretary of State, and Doug Burgum, Secretary of the Interior. Their confirmation hearings, at least to my eyes, didn't have a whole lot of fireworks to them. Do we expect any roadblocks for those nominees?
I don't think so, especially Marco Rubio. He was seen as one of the safest options here in this confirmation process. He's respected on both sides of the aisle in terms of his likely to be soon former Senate colleagues. He is knowledgeable on the subject at hand. You know, he has the background and the experience to be qualified for Secretary of State. So the expectation was that he would be a glide path to confirmation. And after his confirmation hearing, it seems like that is the way it is trending.
Over to the business world, Treasury Secretary Nominee Scott Bessent was pressed about Trump's tariff and tax agenda. And those two related issues, tariffs and tax, are really very contentious as we wait for the new president to take the reins again. Did Bessent give much insight into exactly what the plans were in those respects?
Yeah, so they went back and forth on some specifics, some numbers, but one thing that again struck me as particularly interesting, and of course I come at all this from the Capitol Hill perspective, is that Scott Bessent said that it would be devastating if the Trump tax cuts were not extended. Now, a number of the provisions from the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, TCJA as it goes by, expire at the end of 2025. Extending those tax provisions, that tax package, is one of the highest priorities of congressional Republicans and President-elect Donald Trump in the first 100-day sprint, but really the beginning part of his administration. It's been something we've been talking about a lot up on Capitol Hill. Reconciliation is the term we've been hearing. Republicans are trying to extend those tax cuts through this GOP-only way to go. So Scott Bessent up there on Capitol Hill saying that it would be devastating if those tax cuts were not extended underscores the importance that congressional Republicans are going to approach this reconciliation process once the Trump administration officially kicks off. This, again, has been one of their highest priorities, and hearing what the incoming Treasury Secretary has to say, that is going to probably put more pep in the step of Republicans to figure out how to thread this very complicated needle and at the end of the day extend those Trump tax cuts.
Another very central issue for Trump is obviously immigration. A lot of people thought it was one of his strongest issues in November's election. The first piece of legislation on immigration advanced in the Senate today. The Laken-Riley Act was co-sponsored by Democratic Senator John Fetterman, and it did in fact receive support from multiple Democrats in the Senate. Now, there have been some discussions from the left on amending the bill. Do you think they will be able to negotiate, and will we see this bill pass the Senate anytime soon?
Well, we did recently see the amendment process, and there were only 2 amendments that were voted on. So we're going to have to see how Democrats feel about this. The Laken-Riley Act did clear a key procedural hurdle earlier today, opening up debate on the legislation. But it's going to be interesting to see how Democrats, particularly Democrats in some of those swingy states, approach this matter. People like Alyssa Slotkin, who's from Michigan, folks from Pennsylvania, folks from Nevada. It's going to be fascinating to see how they vote on this legislation. It could be really a significant piece. It would be the first piece of legislation likely enacted during the Trump administration. Republicans on Capitol Hill have made it very clear that they see immigration and the border as a priority, and that's translating to legislation. So this is a big legislative undertaking, and I'm going to be very curious to see how these key Democrats come around and whether or not they vote on it to get it to pass.
So shifting back to the current occupant of the White House, Mychael, there are just 72 hours or thereabouts left of Joe Biden's presidency. And today he very notably announced commutations for 2,500 non-violent drug offenders. And that happens to set the record for the most pardons and commutations by any president. In these final hours of the Biden presidency, is there anything else that you're watching to see if he does?
I guess perhaps maybe more pardons and more commutation. It's funny because for about, years now, we've been talking about would Biden pardon Hunter Biden, would he not? That was sort of something that was expected to come maybe at the very tail end of his presidency. But of course, we know that pardon then came way earlier than was expected. So I suspect that we'll potentially see other pardons and commutations in the final hours, potentially more communication, maybe some more word about that Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal that has been in the works that we did hear the president speak about in his farewell address and then in remarks before that. But these are really the waning days of not just the Biden administration, but Biden's political life, right? It's been roughly 5 decades where he's been in the political atmosphere. That's coming to a close. So I'm going to be curious to see how he handles this, as we really mentioned, these final hours of this crucial 4-year stretch for him.
Mychael Schnell, as always, great reporting. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Niall.
Israel's Security Cabinet has recommended approval of the ceasefire deal that was agreed to by Hamas earlier this week. The deal now heads to the full Israeli cabinet, where it's expected to be given final approval. The deal has received criticism, however, from some of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's far-right allies, those criticisms coming despite the endorsement of the Security Cabinet. If it is approved, the ceasefire should begin on Sunday, and it will secure the release of dozens of hostages held in Gaza since the October 7th attack more than a year ago, as well as nearly 100 Palestinians being held in Israel. The deal would also clear the way for much-needed humanitarian aid to enter the Gaza Strip. Weight loss drugs may soon be much more affordable for millions of people. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services announced Friday that drugs like Wegovy and Ozempic will be included in the next round of price negotiations. Right now, the price for a 1-month supply of Ozempic costs close to $1,000 for those without insurance. According to the CMS, Medicare spent nearly $14.5 billion on weight loss drugs between November of 2023 and October of 2024. During that time period, more than 2 million Medicare enrollees used the drugs to treat diabetes and obesity. Ozempic manufacturer Novo Nordisk sued the Biden administration last year for including another of its diabetes medications, called Novolog, in the first round of negotiations. That first round resulted in 76% coming off the list price for Novolog. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Niall Stanage. Be sure to like, share and subscribe to the Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.